And that's one of my biggest questions. I get the feeling, and I want to get your take on this, that Leo is just trying to hold the middle ground, that he's trying to signal to both sides of these issues because he kept using that word polarizing.
He said was, well, if the issue is basically saying the Mass in Latin, well, then you can say the new Mass in Latin, and that should be sufficient or something to that effect. But that memo should be sent out to some of the bishops who've gone out of their way to crush traditionally oriented Novus Ordo masses, those unicorn masses that they've gone out of their way to smash.
On a number of occasions in this conversation with Crux, he feels like it's his duty, it's his obligation to pick up where Francis left off, as if is that the continuity thing? Like, okay, my job as the Pope, whether I like it or not, is to start where we left off and then go from there. Is that his angle? I mean,
but these are not doctrinal. You can't have the faith contradict Scripture. You can't have the faith contradict the 2,000-year magisterial teachings of the faith. And so that was the language that I was more concerned with.
By the way, my name is Joe McClane. I host a radio program called A Catholic Take, where we look at the world through a Catholic lens. I'd love for you to hang out with us. If you like it, give it a thumbs up and let us know what you think in the comments below.
Be to God in all things. There's been a lot of talk and conversation going around about the interview that His Holiness Pope Leo XIV did with the Crux outlet. We're going to put a link to it, cruxnow.com. It comes in several parts, and the part that I want to focus on today, I would say, is the most interesting to me, at least, because it deals with two very, very hot-button issues. But it's Friday, which means we've got Dr. Anthony Stein on the team. Fridays with Stein from returntotradition.org. Dr. Stein, good morning to you. Thank you for your time.
Good morning, gentlemen. How are you today?
Praise be to God. I'm alive. It's Friday. That counts. And we've survived the week thus far. How are you?
I'm doing well.
Yeah,
it's been an interesting week, as it always is.
Amen. Amen to that. All right. So I found the Pope Leo interview very interesting on a number of levels. There were some things that I thought that might be signaling. And that's one of my biggest questions, biggest overall sentiments here. I get the feeling, and I want to get your take on this. I get the feeling that Leo is just trying to hold the middle ground, that he's trying to signal to both sides of these issues to calm down and take a breath and let's take it one step at a time. Because he kept using that word polarizing, said that a number of times. And he just seems like he's trying to hold the balance in his step one. Well, how do you see it?
I'm not sure, because I'm looking at the reactions to what he said on the liturgy from the observers who are usually calling for people to be calm and give him a chance, and the rest had some of the most negative reaction to what he said about the liturgy.
Really?
Dr. Peter Kwasniewski expressed some sadness at what he said, because it's clear that he's not familiar even with the traditional Latin Mass versus new Mass underlying issues. He also made it sound like, contrary to some of the things said by some of the more problematic bishops in America by implication, that there probably isn't going to be a liturgy document coming in the near future. Now, what's in the medium future, who knows, right? It could be next year for the anniversary, but there had been this kind of whispering that we're going to get a document in October. And while there might be something issued by Cardinal Roach or Fernandez on the issue, I would be shocked if Pope Leo was involved in it at all. And if it was anything from them, wouldn't be anything of any consequence other than maybe more permissions for delaying implementation by some dioceses. But in his statement, his interview, he made it pretty clear he wasn't that familiar with the entire issue. The most upfront he said was, well, if the issue is basically saying the Mass in Latin, well, then you can say the new Mass in Latin, and that should be sufficient or something to that effect. But there's a couple underlying problems there. And the first, of course, is that that memo should be sent out to some of the bishops who've gone out of their way to crush traditionally oriented Novus Ordo masses, those unicorn masses that they've gone out of their way to smash. But the other is that there's a lot more kind of at stake in the new Mass versus traditional Mass debate. And
see, I
don't cover the new Mass.
I think it comes down to how you read it.
Interesting, but
when I was reading his responses, I guess I was spinning it more positive in my mind. It wasn't ideal. It wasn't amazing. I wasn't like, wow, this is so awesome. It wasn't like that. But at the same time, it was like, okay, it feels like he's setting this up for at least a conversation. Maybe he's emotionally preparing that segment within the Vatican and all of the bishops around the world who have come out like a sledgehammer against traditional Catholics, providing not mercy, but injustice, in my humble opinion. Maybe he's preparing them to say, hey, we're going to sit down and we're going to have a conversation about this. Do you think that might be a possibility?
I would be surprised if there wasn't at least a conversation. I mean, every answer he gave in yesterday's release was synodality. Everything will be done in a synodal light.
Oh, yeah.
And there are definitely concerns about that when you're talking about unequivocal dogmatic problems like homosexuality, right? You start running into problems there when you're wanting to talk about things in a synodal way, because there was, at least you can easily read into what he was saying, that attitudes need to change before we talk about changing church teaching. That's how LifeSite News reported it this morning or last night, was that we need to change attitudes, change doctrine.
Why are we changing doctrine? Regardless of attitudes, though, like, why are we changing doctrine? Attitudes, put them aside. Doctrine is either right and true, or it's not. I mean, why are we changing it? Why are we even discussing?
That was said about homosexuality and women's ordination, and neither of those things are doctrine. Like, who can be ordained is not a matter of doctrine, right? I mean, maybe when you start arguing about married men or whatever, but can women be ordained? Is that dogmatic or doctrinal? Does homosexual activity constitute sin that cries out to heaven for justice, akin with murder and usury and things? Or is it a matter of doctrine? Doctrines can change, although not lightly. But these are not doctrinal. You can't have the faith contradict scripture. You can't have the faith contradict the 2,000-year magisterial teachings of the faith. And so that was the language that I was more concerned with.
Yeah, the choice of the words at the moment. I don't have the intention of changing the teaching of the church on the top. Like, at the moment, like, I just think it was a choice of words in the conversation he's having with Crux. But at the same time, I'm like, oh, at the moment, that's a terrible choice of words.
The reason I go so hard when he speaks like this is because we were assured by numerous people in the Roman Curia who are very familiar with then Cardinal Robert Prevost, was that he's a canon lawyer who uses precision when he writes and when he speaks. And that's why I'm concerned that he would have chosen his words carefully. Now, maybe those people were playing up the precision angle a little much, right? Do lawyers speak with precision even in, say, at the dining room table when they're dining with their families? Probably not, right? Not in every situation. But when a pope is giving an interview to a major Catholic outlet, you would hope that they're speaking with precision on these controversial issues that feed into the polarizing of the church, because polarization isn't coming from some guy talking about how he loves the traditional mass and he'd like to have more access to it. Polarization comes from admitting unrepentant public sinners to Holy Communion. That's where polarization comes from, and everything like that. That has happened.
I have to believe Crux, I don't know this one way or the other, I'm just speculating, but I have to believe that Crux had to submit those questions in advance. I've interviewed cardinals and bishops on a number of occasions in my career, and most of the time, with some exception like Bishop Strickland, for instance, or Athanasius Schneider, but most of the time, you have to provide questions ahead of time. They got to know what's coming before you get there. I would have to.
Because most of them don't want gotcha.
They don't want any gotcha questions. They want to think through their questions before. I mean, and that's one of the points that I wanted to point out about this interview with Crux is I'm at least kind of happy and glad to see that they threw difficult questions in here, like the difficulty of the topic itself, the TLM issue, in controversy with the Novus Ordo, the Rainbow Coalition questions. Like, that's good. I'm glad that they asked those questions. I'm glad he at least responded to them. Even if he didn't say everything I absolutely wanted him to say, I'm at least glad he's talking about it. And he also seemed to, like, on a number of occasions in this conversation with Crux, he feels like it's his duty. It's his obligation to pick up where Francis left off, as if, like, is that the continuity thing? Like, okay, my job as the Pope, whether I like it or not, is to start where we left off and then go from there. Is that his angle? I mean, I think it's sending a mixed message to a lot of Catholics who are trying to understand and trying to give them the benefit of the doubt, to be honest.
It is sending a mixed message, since I don't think if, say, Cardinal Burke had become Pope, he'd tell us that he was continuing the program that he inherited from Pope Francis, to paraphrase what he actually said. So it's a choice. Maintaining Fiducia Supplicans and Amoris Laetitia, which are, to me, are much bigger issues actually than the traditional Mass, because they get to doctrine, they get to doctrinal problems, ecclesiological problems. And that's, all the ecclesiology problems is where you get the suppression of the traditional Mass and traditional feeling Novus Ordo Masses. I don't know if you're aware, but Tradition, Family, and Property issued a public letter to Pope Leo asking him to essentially rescind Fiducia Supplicans and Amoris Laetitia. Now, I don't know how you do that if you are saying that you are continuing the program of reform that you inherited from your predecessor. And I don't really even know how you do that without undermining the authority of your predecessor, which nobody does, no pope would do lightly.
Maybe that's the key, though. Maybe that's the key to understanding this, is that he's trying to figure some way forward here, because he gets the gravity and the complications of, upsetting the Francis regime that's still there, honestly, that he has to deal with. I want to give him the benefit of the doubt here. One thing that is that I did like was he seemed to push back on those bishops in Northern Europe who were blessing a couple at a ceremony, all dressed up. Even their own, it's like you and I have talked about Fiducia Supplicans when it came out, and it's speaking out of both sides of its mouth kind of a document, and how it got interpreted. Well, Father Jimmy Martin came out and after the Crux interview and said, "Oh, look, see, this is just a continuation." Apparently, the Order of St. Augustine had retweeted that and then deleted it perhaps after Pope Leo pushed back on the bishops in the north. But again, it just goes to show how confusing it is from the lay folks' perspective.
Well, it's especially confusing because in Italy yesterday, not yesterday, but I reported on this yesterday, that there was a priest in Italy who essentially officiated half a hair's breadth away from a gay marriage.
Wow.
Like the actual, the venue that hosted it basically said it was all but a gay marriage. He explicitly blessed their union. Yes, those bishops in Northern Europe were essentially taking Fiducia Supplicans and reading between the lines a lot and running with it. They need to be rebuked, but the Italian Bishops' Conference is a hot mess. It really is, and it needs to be addressed. Those priests need to be reined in. It's every year I am having to report 3 or 4 times a year on a gay wedding being officiated, or some priest saying mass on the back of a surfboard on the beach somewhere in swimming trunks to a bunch of people who are in bathing suits, dressed horrifyingly and modestly for what it. His backyard. And reminder: the Bishop of Rome, Pope, is also the primate of Italy. We can rein it in directly.
He's also the guy with the keys, and he could simply decide to do something about it. He could. It's possible. It's right there. It's in the power of the keys. Hey, we're having a conversation about the interview Pope Leo did with Crux, with Dr. Anthony Stein from Return to Tradition. Dr. Stein, welcome back. I want to go back to the TLM for a second, because there was something else he said that caught my attention that I want to get some comments on here. He says, of course, he said, you can say the Latin right now in the Novus Ordo. Yeah, we'll tell that to Bishop Martin in Charlotte. I don't think he's gotten that memo, as you said in the last segment. Maybe that should be passed around. I wonder if every priest who wants to say the Novus Ordo in Latin right now can just print this out and hand it to their bishop and say, hey, the Pope said I could do it. He sits on the chair, and maybe they'll get away with it. I don't know. Let's see. But he says, I think sometimes they say abuse of the liturgy from what we call the Vatican II Mass was not helpful for people who were looking for a deeper experience of prayer, of contact with the mystery of the faith that they seem to find in the celebration of the Tridentine Mass. Again, we've become polarized, so that instead of being able to say, well, if we celebrate the Vatican II liturgy in a proper way, do you really find that much difference between this experience and that experience? Now, here's the thing I want to talk about this. I'm sure that there is a pretty good segment of Catholics who might feel this way. They're like, yeah, I go to the Novus Ordo Mass and there's all these distractions. There's hand holding at the Our Father. There's the glad handing before Mass starts. There's the, just the general environment or whatever, let alone bad things that have happened. All of the clown masses that we've seen over the years. There's all of that too. And maybe they feel this way. I just want to be closer deeper in the mystery, deeper in prayer. And maybe this would be fine for them. But honestly, I think this misses the point entirely for a lot of traditional Catholics. I don't think this is their argument. What say you?
I find it interesting that it's the experience is what he's talking about. And this is because this is almost a reiteration of what you see from a lot of like defenders of the Second Vatican Council and the controversies there, that, this is man-centered. We're focusing on man. So we're talking about the Mass as your experience, whereas the traditional writings on the Mass usually talk about worship due to God in a way that he finds pleasing, which is not man-centered. So you can start getting to some higher level things here. Now, granted, many arguments in favor of the traditional Mass go back to the experience question anyway, but because it is hard to pray or take a Mass seriously if your priest gets up to the ambo and gives the standard, unfortunately, what almost seems like the standard homily of dad joke, maybe a second dad joke, and then a not terribly in-depth analysis of the reading or just whatever topic, basic topic of the day is, if at all, without anything having to, ruffle feathers, right? Or you get a political screed, right? But aside from that and the sort of the unfortunate behavior you see from people at Mass, there is some reducing it to just a pure experience question gets kind of away from the issue. It misses the issue because a lot of the questions traditional Catholics have about the new Mass, it comes from its origins, where it came from, the men who designed it at their committee meetings, one of which was in a cafe. Who were the people who were there designing it? Protestant ministers, we know, were involved, which is a problem.
On a napkin.
The Catholic Church seems to have it. On a napkin, one of the Eucharistic prayers, right? And we have this consistent problem where the Catholics, for some reason, really care a lot about what non-Catholics have to say about how we worship. I never understood, for instance, could you imagine, Muslims asking us what we thought about how they worship and what we would suggest they do to change how they worship? Could you even wrap your brain around that? I can't. So why do we do it with others, right? And that was a lot of the thinking that went into it. So it's a more complicated question than just experience, because there are people who, they don't leave a clown Mass, to use a sort of a crude kind of way of describing it. They don't leave a clown Mass to go to the TLM. Although plenty of people do that, but there are people who go to the Unicorn Reverent Novus Ordo for a while, and then they leave that for the traditional Mass.
Right. Yeah, that's true for me. It's true for my family. That's exactly what we did.
Right. And how do you explain it? I went from a typical parish where the abuses weren't terrible over the top. For me, the breaking point was they ditched the rosary before Mass and replaced it with a 30-minute country Western rendition of the Divine Mercy Chaplet. I'm not joking about that. That happened, and that was the breaking point for me. I just never going to do that again. Yes, that happened.
I have to hear that just out of novelty now. I've got to know what that sounds like.
But it's not just the clown masses that scare people away. Isn't it good enough if it's done in Latin doesn't address the people like yourself who?
Yeah, I guess that's my point about this is I think it misses the mark in the sense that I do believe there are people who simply all they want is to be deeper in the mystery and deeper into prayer. And praise be to God, those are good things, by the way. I'm not faulting that at all. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I think it misses the argument of why traditional Catholics are so adamant and so, advocating for the TLM. It's because they want more of that 2,000-year history and depth of tradition, of patrimony, of custom, and everything else. They want to be at the same Mass that the great saints were in ecstasy. Saint Joseph of Cupertino, wasn't that yesterday? We celebrated his feast day. He would levitate often. In the Mass itself, he would be in ecstasy. We want to be at that same Mass as the great saints. We want that rich depth and mystery of it. It's not just a matter of experience. It's a matter of continuity through time and space with the great saints that have gone before and have given us such an organic liturgy that does elevate us and does provide that experience. So I just think that this is, it almost feels like a bit of a shell game, almost like, it's just this little piece over here. No, back up. It's bigger. It's bigger than that. Do you think he's going to have the opportunity to talk to the right kind of people who will help him better understand that? Is it Cardinal Burke? Is it Athanasius Schneider? Who's the best and the brightest to be able to help him better understand what the arguments are for the traditional Latin Mass community, who is so upset over Traditionis custodes?
It'll be the Cardinal Burke or Bishop Schneider. Those would be the two people, one of the two people you'd go with. Whether he'll make use of that is entirely his decision. I know both of those men would not hesitate. They drop what they're doing to go have that meeting with the Pope. But
and yeah, he's already met with him a couple times. So when he talks about upcoming opportunities and like using a synodal process, I was listening to Kennedy Hall yesterday, and I also listened to Nicholas Cavazos on this. Both of them, spun this fairly positively, I would argue. Not 100% amazing, not amazing, but like they saw some silver lining in all of this. And they wondered whether or not this, this language of using the synodal process to have this conversation in particular might be good, because you and I talked about this a number of times during the synodal process under Francis. They routinely cut the traditional Latin Mass community out of those conversations, those listening sessions. You got 30 seconds, last say.
To be included in those conversations would be a good thing. But my fear is if they bring the traditional Mass back to some degree, it will be on the road to sort of Anglicanizing the Catholic Church, where you'll have a high Catholic Church and a low Catholic Church. And if you are really concerned about unity, especially in ecclesiology and in faith, that's not what you want. You need to find another solution to this problem. And I don't think a full restoration of the PLM and the abolition of the Novus Ordo is ever going to happen, at least not this side of an apocalypse. So
I agree.
Did you like that video? It's okay. You can admit it. It's perfectly fine. Hey, we cover the big stories of our day, from inside the church to outside the church to all points in between, and we do it from a Catholic perspective. It's called A Catholic Take. It's a radio program Monday through Friday. We live stream it right here on this channel, by the way, so make sure to subscribe, like, and share. We would be very grateful to you. And don't forget, you're going to want to watch this video right here because you don't want to miss anything.